In the spring of 1873, in a forgotten Montana settlement where worthless women were sold for the price of a mule, Caleb Ward walked into a room full of desperate mail-order brides and chose the one no man would touch. A woman with no family, no dowry, and a past that made even the preacher look away. He didn't ask her name, he didn't promise love. He simply looked at Eliza Monroe standing alone in the corner, saw something everyone else had missed, and said 5 words that would change both their lives forever. "I'll take her, right now." What followed wasn't a love story. It was a reckoning. This is the story of 2 people the world had already forgotten, and the life they built when no one believed they deserved one. If you want to see how 2 broken people forge something unbreakable from nothing but dirt, silence, and second chances, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The settlement didn't have a name worth remembering. It sat at the edge of Montana territory like a bruise on the landscape. 3 crooked buildings, a trading post that doubled as a saloon, and a church with a cross that leaned so far to the left it looked like it was trying to escape. The April wind carried dust and the smell of manure, and the few people who called this place home did so only because they'd run out of reasons to keep running. Caleb Ward rode in just after dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain. His horse was tired. So was he. He'd been on the trail for 6 weeks, moving supplies from one forgotten outpost to another, sleeping under stars that offered no comfort and skies that promised nothing. His beard was thick with dust, his clothes stiff with sweat and grime, and his eyes held the particular emptiness of a man who'd stopped expecting the world to offer him anything good. He hitched his horse outside the trading post and stood for a moment, letting his spine adjust to being vertical again. His back ached, his shoulders burned. Somewhere deep in his chest, there was a heaviness that had nothing to do with the work and everything to do with the years. The trading post smelled like tobacco and wet wood. Behind the counter, a man with a gray beard and suspicious eyes watched Caleb enter without bothering to smile. "Supplies," Caleb said. "What kind?" "Flour, coffee, salt. Whatever you got that won't kill me." The man nodded slowly, reaching under the counter for a ledger. "You passing through or staying?" "Passing." "Most do." The man's eyes flicked toward the back of the room, where a narrow doorway led to what might have been storage or sleeping quarters. "Unless you're looking for something else." Caleb frowned. "Just supplies." The man leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "There's a preacher here today. Brought a wagon full of women from back east. Mail-order brides, they call them. Men been coming in since yesterday, picking through 'em like cattle." Caleb said nothing. "You married?" the man asked. "No." "Might want to consider it. Some of these women, they got nowhere else to go. Take one off the preacher's hands. He'll probably thank you for it." Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. He'd heard of these arrangements before. Desperate women shipped west like cargo, parceled out to lonely men who needed someone to cook and clean and bear children. It was a transaction, a business arrangement dressed up in the language of matrimony. "I'm not interested," Caleb said. The man shrugged. "Suit yourself. But the preacher's set up in the church if you change your mind. He's leaving tomorrow, and whatever women he can't place, he's taking back with him, or leaving behind. Depends on his mood." Caleb paid for his supplies and left without another word. But as he loaded the sacks onto his horse, he found himself looking toward the church. The crooked cross caught the morning light, casting a thin shadow across the dirt road. He told himself to mount up and ride out. He told himself this wasn't his concern, that other people's misery wasn't his to carry. He told himself a lot of things. Then he walked toward the church. Inside, the air was cooler but no less oppressive. The pews had been pushed to the sides, leaving an open space in the center where a small group of women stood in a loose cluster. They ranged in age from barely 20 to well past 40, each one wearing travel-worn dresses and expressions that hovered somewhere between hope and resignation. At the front of the room, a thin man in a black coat and a too-tight collar was speaking to a rancher Caleb recognized from previous trips through the territory. The rancher was broad-shouldered and red-faced, the kind of man who shouted when he talked and never listened when others spoke. "This one here," the preacher was saying, gesturing to a young woman with blonde hair and frightened eyes. "She's strong, good childbearing hips, knows how to sew." The rancher circled her like he was inspecting a horse. She talk much? Not excessively. Good. I don't need a woman who talks. The rancher reached out and grabbed the woman's chin, tilting her face toward the light. She flinched, but didn't pull away. She'll do. What's the fee? $50, includes the marriage license. The rancher grunted and pulled a wad of bills from his pocket. Caleb stood near the doorway, his jaw tight. Around the room, other men were engaged in similar negotiations. An older farmer was haggling over a woman with graying hair and tired hands. A young cowboy was asking the preacher if any of the women could cook game. The women themselves stood silent, their eyes fixed on the floor or the walls or some point in the distance where dignity might still exist. And then Caleb saw her. She was standing apart from the others, in the far corner near a window that hadn't been cleaned in years. She wasn't the youngest. She wasn't the prettiest. Her dress was plain brown wool, patched at the elbows and fraying at the hem. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a severe bun that made her face look sharper than it probably was. She held herself very still, as if by not moving she might become invisible. No one was looking at her, not the men, not the preacher, not even the other women. Caleb watched as the rancher led the blonde woman toward the preacher's makeshift desk to sign papers. He watched as the farmer shook hands over his chosen bride. He watched as one by one the women were claimed, inspected, reduced to terms and conditions. And still, the woman in the corner stood alone. The preacher noticed Caleb after a few minutes and approached with a practiced smile. "Good morning, friend. I don't believe we've met. Reverend Thomas Paller, servant of the faithful and facilitator of Christian unions." "Caleb Ward." "Mr. Ward." "Excellent. Are you in the market for a wife? I still have several fine women available. This one here," he gestured to a woman with red hair and a nervous smile. "She's from Pennsylvania, educated, can read and write. Or perhaps you'd prefer someone more suited to frontier work." "I have a widow, strong as an ox, experienced in farm labor. The one in the corner," Caleb said quietly. The preacher blinked. "I'm sorry?" Caleb nodded toward the woman by the window. "Her." The preacher's smile faltered. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at Caleb, confusion flickering across his face. "Miss Monroe? Are you certain?" "I'm certain." The preacher lowered his voice, stepping closer. "Mr. Ward, I feel obligated to inform you that Miss Monroe is, well, she's been passed over by every man who's come through here. She has no family, no references, and frankly, her circumstances before arriving were unclear." "I didn't ask about her circumstances." "Yes, but I have a responsibility to ensure these unions are appropriate. Miss Monroe is not— Is she available or not?" The preacher hesitated, clearly torn between his apparent concern and the opportunity to unload a woman no one else wanted. "She is available. However, then I'll take her." The words hung in the air. Across the room, the woman in the corner looked up for the first time. Her eyes met Caleb's, and for a moment something passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but acknowledgement. She saw him seeing her, and she didn't look away. The preacher cleared his throat. "The fee is $50. That includes the marriage license and the paperwork. I'll need both of you to sign, and we can perform the ceremony immediately." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a roll of bills. He counted out $50 and placed it in the preacher's hand. "No ceremony." "I beg your pardon?" "Just the license. We'll say our own words." The preacher's mouth opened and closed. "Mr. Ward, I must insist on a proper ceremony. The sanctity of marriage requires—" "The license," Caleb repeated, his voice flat and final. The preacher looked like he wanted to argue, but the money in his hand seemed to outweigh his theological concerns. He sighed, shook his head, and turned toward his desk. "Very well. Miss Monroe, please come here." The woman moved slowly, crossing the room with careful steps, as if she were navigating ice. Up close, Caleb could see the lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together. She was older than he'd first thought, maybe 30, maybe more. Her face was angular, all sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, and her eyes were a gray blue that reminded him of winter skies. The preacher laid out the papers. "Full names, please." "Caleb James Ward." The woman's voice was quieter, but steady. Eliza Catherine Monroe. The preacher wrote quickly, his pen scratching across the page. Mr. Ward, do you take this woman as your lawful wife to provide for and protect, in accordance with the laws of Montana Territory and the will of... I do. The preacher frowned but continued. Miss Monroe, do you take this man as your lawful husband to honor and obey? I do. Her voice was stronger now. The preacher signed the bottom of the license with a flourish that seemed entirely out of place. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you legally bound in matrimony. May you... Caleb took the license from the desk before the preacher could finish. He folded it once and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he turned to Eliza. You have anything you need to collect? She shook her head. Just what I'm wearing. Then we're leaving. He started toward the door. After a moment, she followed. Behind them, the preacher called out something about blessings and divine grace, but Caleb didn't turn around. He pushed through the church doors and stepped back into the sunlight, Eliza a few paces behind. The settlement looked the same as it had an hour ago. Crooked buildings, dusty streets, a handful of people who didn't care about anyone's story but their own. Caleb walked to his horse and began checking the straps on his supply packs. Eliza stood a few feet away, her arms folded across her chest. Where are we going? My homestead, about 15 miles north. Is there a house? Yes. Anyone else there? No. She was quiet for a moment, watching him work. Then, why did you choose me? Caleb paused, his hands still on the leather straps. It was a fair question. He didn't have a good answer, or maybe he did, and he just didn't know how to say it. He'd chosen her because she was alone, because no one else had, because, when he looked at her standing in that corner, invisible and discarded, he'd recognized something he knew too well, the weight of being unwanted, the exhaustion of carrying a past no one cared to understand. He'd chosen her because he was tired of being alone, and because she looked like she was tired of it too. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he met her eyes and said, because you were there. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even kind, but it was honest. Eliza nodded slowly as if she'd expected nothing more. What are the rules? Rules? For the marriage. What you expect from me. Caleb thought about it. You work. I work. We don't ask questions we don't want answered. We don't make promises we can't keep. And we treat each other with respect even when it's hard. That's it? That's it. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she walked to the horse and placed one hand on the saddle. I can walk if the horse can't carry both of us. He can carry both of us. Caleb mounted first, then reached down. Eliza took his hand. Her grip was strong, calloused, and he pulled her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her posture stiff, her hands hovering uncertainly before finally resting lightly on his waist. He nudged the horse forward, and they rode out of the settlement without looking back. The land opened up around them as they traveled north. Rolling hills gave way to flatland, and flatland gave way to forests of pine and spruce that climbed the slopes of distant mountains. The sky was wide and impossibly blue, the kind of sky that made a person feel small and significant all at once. They didn't talk. Caleb focused on the trail, guiding the horse around rocks and fallen branches. Behind him, Eliza's hands remained on his waist, steady but not clinging. He could feel her breathing, the slight rise and fall of her chest against his back, and it occurred to him that this was the closest he'd been to another person in years. After an hour, they stopped near a creek to let the horse drink. Caleb dismounted and stretched, his legs stiff from riding. Eliza climbed down on her own, moving carefully, and walked to the edge of the water. She knelt and cupped her hands, splashing water onto her face and neck. The dust from the settlement washed away, revealing skin that was pale and freckled. She drank a little, then sat back on her heels, staring at the water. Caleb crouched a few feet away, refilling his canteen. You ever been this far west before? No, she said. I came from Ohio. Before that, Pennsylvania. What brought you west? She glanced at him, and he saw the hesitation in her eyes. The calculation of how much to say, how much to keep hidden. I needed to leave. He didn't push. Fair enough. What about you? she asked. How long have you been out here? 7 years? Maybe 8? Alone? Mostly. She nodded, looking back at the water. That must be hard. It's what I know. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek and the wind moving through the trees. A bird called from somewhere overhead, a sharp, clear note that echoed off the rocks. Can I ask you something? Eliza said finally. Go ahead. Do you regret it? Choosing me? Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't asking out of insecurity or self-pity. She was asking because she wanted to know where she stood, what kind of ground she was walking on. No, he said, I don't regret it. Why not? Because I made a choice, and I'm not in the habit of second-guessing myself. Even if it turns out to be the wrong choice, then I'll deal with it when it happens. She almost smiled. Almost. You're not much of a talker, are you? No. Good. Neither am I. They mounted the horse again and continued north. The homestead appeared just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. It sat in a wide clearing surrounded by pine trees, with the mountains rising in the distance like the backbone of the world. The house was small, maybe 3 rooms, but it was solid, built from logs that had been carefully chinked with mud and moss. There was a barn, weathered but standing, and a chicken coop that looked like it hadn't seen chickens in years. A vegetable garden plot lay dormant, overrun with weeds. Caleb dismounted and helped Eliza down. She stood for a moment, taking it all in. This is it, he said. She walked slowly toward the house, her eyes moving over the structure, the land, the way the light fell across the clearing. When she reached the porch, she turned back to him. How long have you been here? 4 years. By yourself? Yes. She climbed the steps and pushed open the door. Caleb followed, watching as she stepped inside and surveyed the single main room. There was a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner covered with a faded quilt. Shelves lined one wall holding supplies, canned goods, tools, a few books. Everything was tidy, organized, functional. There's a second room through there, Caleb said, nodding toward a doorway. Storage, mostly. I can clear it out. Make it a bedroom. Eliza walked to the window and looked out at the clearing. This one's fine. For both of us? She turned to face him. You said we treat each other with respect. That means I sleep in the bed, you sleep somewhere else until we both decide different. Those are my terms. Caleb nodded. Fair enough. I'll take the floor. You don't have to. I've slept on worse. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. He showed her the rest of the house, the small storeroom, the back door that led to the barn, the well just outside where they drew water. She listened without comment, her expression neutral, absorbing information the way someone might study a map before a long journey. When the tour was finished, she rolled up her sleeves. What needs doing? You don't have to. I'm not asking to be polite, she said firmly. I'm asking because I need to know what work keeps this place running. You said I work, you work. So tell me what needs doing. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a small, unexpected stirring that might have been respect. The garden needs clearing. Chickens need tending, if you can find any that haven't wandered off. Water needs hauling, and the roof over the barn has a leak that needs patching before the next rain. Eliza nodded. I'll start with the garden. She walked outside without waiting for a response. Caleb stood in the doorway watching as she crossed the clearing and knelt beside the overgrown plot. She didn't hesitate, didn't pause to wonder if this was her responsibility. She simply began pulling weeds, her movement steady and methodical. He turned away and went to tend the horse. That first night, they ate in silence. Caleb cooked beans and salt pork, bread he'd baked 2 days ago that was already going stale. Eliza sat across from him at the table, her hands folded in her lap, waiting until he served himself before taking her own portion. The food was plain, barely seasoned, but she ate without complaint. When she finished, she stood and collected both plates without being asked. She washed them in a basin of water, then set them on the shelf to dry. Caleb watched her move around the small space, efficient and careful, touching nothing that wasn't necessary. She was learning the house the way someone learns a new language, listening for patterns, testing boundaries. "There's coffee if you want it," he said. "I'm fine. Thank you." She dried her hands on a cloth and glanced toward the bed in the corner. "I can sleep in the storeroom if that's easier." "I said you take the bed. I meant it." "I don't want to, Eliza." He waited until she looked at him. "Take the bed." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right." Caleb stood and retrieved a spare blanket from the shelf. He spread it on the floor near the fireplace, far enough from the bed to offer privacy, but close enough to the warmth to keep the chill off. He lay down, his back to her, and closed his eyes. Behind him, he heard the faint rustle of fabric as she removed her boots, the creak of the bed frame as she settled in. Then silence. He thought she might speak, ask a question, make some comment about the day, the strangeness of their situation, but she didn't. And neither did he. Outside, the wind picked up, moving through the pine trees with a sound like distant water. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The fire crackled and popped, burning low. Caleb lay awake for a long time, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. He thought about the woman in the bed behind him, about the choice he'd made, about the quiet weight of another person's presence in a space that had been empty for so long. He didn't know if this would work. He didn't know if they would find a way to live together without breaking each other. He didn't know if choosing her had been an act of compassion or selfishness or simple exhaustion. But he knew that when he'd looked at her standing alone in that church, forgotten and invisible, something in him had recognized something in her. And that recognition had been enough to make him walk across the room and say 5 words he couldn't take back. "I'll take her, right now." He'd chosen her. And now they would both have to live with that choice. The next morning began before dawn. Caleb woke to find Eliza already awake, standing by the window with her arms wrapped around herself, watching the first pale light creep across the clearing. She turned when she heard him move. "Didn't mean to wake you," she said quietly. "You didn't." He stood and began building up the fire. She didn't offer to help, didn't move from the window. He had the sense she was waiting for something, permission, maybe, or instruction on how to navigate this strange new life. When the fire was going, he put coffee on to boil. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough." She paused. "You?" "Same." The coffee pot began to hiss and steam. Caleb poured 2 cups and handed one to her. She took it with both hands, inhaling the bitter, dark smell. "I was thinking," she said, "about what needs doing." "All right." "The garden. I can get it cleared in a few days, but if we're going to plant anything, we'll need seeds. And the chicken coop's empty. If you want chickens, we'll need to get some from town. Town's a day's ride." "I know, but if we're going to make this place work, we'll need more than what you've got stored up." Caleb sipped his coffee, considering. She was right. He'd been living lean, stretching his supplies, making do. But with 2 people, the calculations changed. "We'll go in a few days, once you've had time to settle." "I'm settled now." He looked at her. "It's been 1 night." "I know how long it's been." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "I'm not asking for time to adjust. I'm asking to do the work that needs doing." Something in her tone reminded him of tempered steel, shaped by heat, hardened by purpose. "All right," he said. "We'll go to town in 3 days." She nodded and took a long drink of coffee. Then she set the cup down and went outside. Caleb watched through the window as she walked back to the garden plot and resumed pulling weeds. The morning light caught in her hair, turning the dark strands almost bronze. Her sleeves were still rolled up from yesterday, and he could see the muscles in her forearms flex and release as she worked. She didn't stop, didn't look up, didn't wait for approval or acknowledgement. She just worked. And Caleb realized, standing there with his coffee growing cold in his hands, that he'd married a woman who understood the same thing he did, that out here, survival wasn't a matter of love or hope or prayer. It was a matter of work and silence, and the slow, steady building of something that might, if they were careful, if they were lucky, last longer than either of them expected. He finished his coffee, set the cup aside, and went out to patch the barn roof. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Caleb rose first, always, building the fire and making coffee before Eliza woke. She would emerge quietly, accept her cup without comment, and head straight to whatever task she'd assigned herself the night before. They worked separately, mostly. He mended fences and cleared brush. She tackled the garden with a determination that bordered on fierce, her hands raw and bleeding by the third day, but her progress undeniable. In the evenings, they ate together, simple meals, nothing fancy, and then sat by the fire, not talking, just existing in the same space. Caleb found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she moved with purpose, never wasting motion. The way she handled tools with confidence, as if she'd done hard labor before and knew its weight. The way she sometimes paused in her work and stared at the mountains, her expression distant, like she was remembering something or someone far away. He didn't ask. He'd learned a long time ago that people carried their pasts like stones in their pockets, heavy, sharp-edged, impossible to set down. If she wanted to share hers, she would. If she didn't, that was her right. On the fourth morning, he found her at the well before dawn, hauling water in the dark. He stopped a few feet away, watching as she tied the bucket to the rope and lowered it down. "Why are you doing this now?" he asked. She didn't startle, didn't turn around. "Because it needs doing. It can wait until daylight." "Can it?" She pulled the rope hand over the hand, the bucket rising slowly from the depths. "Everything out here needs doing. If I wait for daylight, I'll run out of hours before I run out of tasks." He moved closer, taking the rope from her hands when the bucket reached the top. Their fingers brushed, brief, accidental, and she pulled back quickly. "I can manage," she said. "I know you can." He lifted the bucket and set it on the edge of the well. "But you don't have to do everything yourself." "Why not? You do." "I'm used to it." "So am I." They stood in the darkness, the well between them, neither willing to concede the point. Finally, Eliza picked up the bucket and started back toward the house. Caleb followed. Inside, she set the bucket down and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why haven't you asked me anything about where I came from, why I was in that church, what I did before?" He considered the question. "Because it's your story to tell, or keep. Same as mine. Most men would want to know." "I'm not most men." She almost smiled again. Almost. "No, you're not." She turned away and began preparing breakfast. Caleb watched her for a moment, then went back outside to check on the horse. When he returned, she had eggs and bread laid out on the table. They ate together, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable, but something else. Familiar, maybe. Earned. "We'll leave for town tomorrow," Caleb said. "Early. Should get there by evening if we don't stop too long." Eliza nodded. "I'll be ready." That night, as he lay on his blanket by the fire and listened to her breathing from the bed, Caleb thought about the question she'd asked, about why he hadn't pressed her for answers, hadn't demanded to know her history. The truth was, he didn't need to know. He'd seen enough in the way she moved, the way she worked, the way she held herself, always braced, always ready for the world to take something from her. He recognized it because he'd lived it. Whatever had brought her to that church, whatever had left her standing alone in the corner while other women were chosen, it didn't matter. Not to him. What mattered was that she was here now, that she'd agreed to this strange, silent arrangement, that she pulled weeds until her hands bled and hauled water in the dark and never once asked him to make it easier. What mattered was that for the first time in years, when he woke in the morning, he wasn't alone, and neither was she. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The fire burned low. And in the darkness, two people who'd been unwanted by the world tried to build something neither of them had ever had before. A place to belong. They left for town just after first light, when the air still held the night's chill and the sky was the color of steel. Eliza wore the same brown dress she'd arrived in, but she'd mended the hem and washed the dust from the fabric. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she carried herself with the same careful posture she'd had that first day in the church, ready for judgment, braced for disappointment. Caleb had saddled the horse and loaded 2 empty sacks for supplies. He helped Eliza mount, then swung up behind her. This time, her hand settled on his waist without hesitation, and he felt the small shift in her weight as she adjusted to the horse's rhythm. They rode in silence for the first hour, the landscape rolling past in shades of green and brown. The trail wound through pine forests and across open meadows where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. A creek ran parallel to the path for a while, its water clear and fast over smooth stones. Eliza spoke first. "How often do you go to town?" "Once a month, maybe, sometimes less." "That must be lonely." "I don't mind it." She was quiet for a moment. "What do people there think of you?" "Don't know. Don't ask." "They're going to wonder about me." "Let them." He felt her shift behind him, turning slightly to look back at the trail they'd covered. "I'm not used to people talking about me and not caring what they say." "You'll get used to it." "Will I?" Caleb slowed the horse as they approached a narrow section of trail where rocks jutted out on both sides. "Out here, what people think doesn't put food on the table or fix a roof, so I stopped listening a long time ago." "That's easier said than done." "Most things are." They emerged from the narrow pass into a wider valley. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys, marking the settlement like a stain against the horizon. Eliza tensed slightly, her hands tightening on his waist. "You don't have to come inside with me," Caleb said. "You can wait with the horse if you'd rather." "No." Her voice was firm. "I'm your wife now. People need to see that." "You don't owe them anything. I'm not doing it for them." He didn't ask what she meant. He nudged the horse forward, and they continued toward the settlement. By the time they arrived, the sun was high and hot. The same crooked buildings stood in the same positions, and the same few people moved between them with the slow, purposeful gait of those who had nowhere else to be. Caleb hitched the horse outside the trading post and helped Eliza down. She stood close to him, not touching, but near enough that anyone watching would understand they were together. Her chin was up, her expression neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." They walked inside together. The man behind the counter looked up, and recognition flickered across his face. "Mr. Ward, back already?" "Need supplies." The man's eyes shifted to Eliza, and something changed in his expression. Curiosity mixed with the particular kind of judgment reserved for women who didn't fit expected categories. "This the one you took from the preacher?" "This is my wife," Caleb said evenly. "Eliza." The man nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made Caleb's jaw tighten. "Ma'am." Eliza met his eyes without flinching. "Good afternoon." "What can I get you?" the man asked, looking back at Caleb. "Seeds, vegetable garden, whatever you've got that'll grow in rocky soil. Also need chickens, at least 6 hens and a rooster." "Chickens are out back, seeds are on the shelf behind you. Anything else?" "Fabric," Eliza said quietly. "If you have it, and thread." The man pulled out a roll of plain cotton, nothing fancy, and set it on the counter along with several spools of thread. Caleb gathered the seed packets, beans, carrots, squash, potatoes, and added them to the pile. "That'll be $12 for the lot," the man said. "Chickens are $2 each, so another 14 for the birds." Caleb counted out the money. While the man wrapped the fabric and seeds, Caleb leaned closer to Eliza. "I'll get the chickens. You want to look around?" She shook her head. "I'll come with you." They walked behind the trading post to a small pen where a dozen chickens scratched in the dirt. A younger man, maybe the shopkeeper's son, was sitting on a fence post whittling a piece of wood. He looked up when they approached. "Need birds?" he asked. 6 hens, 1 rooster, Caleb said. The young man hopped down and opened the pen. He moved among the chickens with practiced ease, grabbing them one by one and checking their condition before handing them to Caleb. "These are good layers. The rooster's young, but he's got spirit." Caleb held the crate while the young man loaded the birds. Beside him, Eliza watched the process with quiet attention, her eyes tracking each movement. "You know anything about keeping chickens, ma'am?" the young man asked. "Some," Eliza said. "Enough to keep them alive." He grinned. "That's all anyone can ask." When the crate was full, Caleb paid and they carried the chickens back to the horse. He was tying the crate to the saddle when a voice called out from across the street. "Well, look who it is! Caleb Ward, the hermit himself." Caleb turned to see the red-faced rancher from the church, the one who'd inspected the blonde woman like livestock. He was standing outside the saloon, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. Didn't think you had it in you, the rancher continued, walking closer. Taking a wife. And that one too. His eyes slid to Eliza with undisguised contempt. The preacher was practically begging someone to take her off his hands. Guess you figured even a used-up woman's better than none at all. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. He stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the rancher. Walk away. The rancher laughed. Or what? You gonna fight me over damaged goods? Last chance. The rancher's smile faded. He looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and seemed to recognize something in his eyes that made him reconsider. Suit yourself, he muttered. But don't come crying when you figure out why nobody else wanted her. He turned and walked back toward the saloon. Caleb watched him go, his fists clenched, his breathing controlled. Behind him, Eliza's voice was quiet. We should leave. He turned to face her. Her expression was carefully blank, but he could see the hurt beneath it, the old wound that had just been reopened. Eliza, please, let's just go. He wanted to say something, to tell her the rancher's words meant nothing, that he was a fool and a bully and not worth the air it took to speak his name. But he could see she didn't want comfort. She wanted distance. So he helped her onto the horse, and they rode out of town without another word. The journey back to the homestead felt longer than the journey there. Eliza sat rigid behind him, her hands on his waist, but her body held apart, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. The silence between them was different now, heavier, weighted with things unsaid. When they finally reached the clearing, the sun was low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Caleb dismounted and helped Eliza down. She stepped away immediately, walking toward the house without waiting. Eliza, he called. She stopped but didn't turn around. What he said back there, I don't want to talk about it. I need you to know it doesn't matter to me. She turned then, and her eyes were hard. Doesn't it? You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I did, or where I've been, or why I ended up in that church. Maybe he was right. Maybe I am damaged goods. Caleb set the crate of chickens down and walked toward her slowly. You want to tell me your story? You can. You want to keep it to yourself? That's fine too. But don't let some small-minded fool make you think I regret choosing you. How do you know you won't? Once you know the truth? Because I've lived long enough to know that people's pasts don't tell the whole story. What matters is what you do now. And right now, you're standing on my land, working harder than anyone I've ever met, asking nothing and giving everything. That's what I see. That's all I need to see. Her eyes searched his face, looking for deception or pity. He let her look. He had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Finally, she spoke. My husband died 3 years ago. Caleb waited. We had a small farm in Ohio. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. When he got sick, I did everything I could. Sold what we had, borrowed money for doctors. It wasn't enough. He died in the winter, and I was left with debts I couldn't pay. Her voice was steady, factual, as if she were recounting someone else's life. The bank took the farm. I had nowhere to go. I worked where I could, kitchens, laundries, taking in sewing, but it wasn't enough to live on. A woman alone with no family, no references. She looked away. I did what I had to do to survive, and people remembered. When the preacher came through looking for women to bring west, I saw a chance to leave it all behind, but the past doesn't wash off that easy. Caleb absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. What was his name, your husband? Thomas. Did you love him? I did, very much. Then you did right by him. The rest, what you had to do after, that's survival. Nobody with sense judges a person for trying to live. The rancher did. I told you, he's a fool. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and fragile in the fading light. I wanted you to know. Before we go any further, you deserve to know what you were getting. Caleb closed the distance between them and stood directly in front of her. What I got was a woman who's strong enough to survive losing everything and keep going. A woman who doesn't complain or quit or expect the world to be fair. That's what I see, Eliza. That's what I chose. She looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes, but not falling. Why are you being kind to me? Because you're my wife, and because you deserve it. The tears spilled over then, silent and sudden. She pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. Caleb stood there, uncertain, before slowly reaching out and placing one hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. They stood like that as the sun set and the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. When her tears finally stopped, she wiped her face with her sleeve and stepped back. "I'll get the chickens settled," she said, her voice rough. "I'll help." Together they carried the crate to the coop and released the birds one by one. The chickens explored their new home with cautious curiosity, pecking at the dirt and roosting on the old wooden beams. Eliza scattered feed she'd brought from town, and they watched as the birds began to settle in. "They'll lay better once they're used to the place," she said. "How do you know?" "I grew up on a farm, before I married Thomas, before everything else. I know chickens." "Good. Then they're your responsibility." She glanced at him, almost smiling. "Trying to get out of work? Delegating? There's a difference?" This time she did smile. It was small and fleeting, but it was there. That night they ate together by the fire. Caleb had cooked again, beans and bacon, bread that was somehow worse than last time. Eliza ate without complaint, then helped clean up. When the dishes were done, she stood by the window looking out at the clearing. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "Peaceful." "Most days." "Do you ever get lonely?" He thought about it. "I did, before." "And now?" "Now I've got chickens." He paused. "And you." She turned to look at him, and something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the beginning of it. "I'm glad you chose me, Caleb, even if I didn't understand why." "I told you, you were there." "It's more than that, though, isn't it?" He met her eyes. "Maybe, but I'm still figuring out what it is." She nodded slowly. "So am I." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, one that felt less like two strangers occupying the same space and more like something tentative and fragile but real. Eliza threw herself into the work with renewed determination. The garden began to take shape, neat rows of freshly turned earth where she'd planted the seeds they'd bought. The chickens adapted quickly, and within a week she was collecting eggs each morning. Caleb worked the land, mending fences and clearing brush, but he found himself watching her more often, the way she talked to the chickens as she fed them, her voice soft and encouraging. The way she paused in her work to wipe sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across her temple. The way she sometimes hummed while she worked, nothing he recognized, just formless melodies that seemed to come from someplace deep inside her. One afternoon he came back from checking the fence line to find her sitting on the porch steps, her hands in her lap, staring at nothing. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You all right?" She blinked, as if coming back from somewhere far away. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it is. Being here. Feeling like maybe I could stay." He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You can stay as long as you want." "What if I want to stay forever?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Caleb looked out at the clearing, at the mountains in the distance, at the life they were slowly, carefully building. "Then you stay forever." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I just needed to hear it." They sat together in silence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Somewhere in the trees, birds called to each other. The chickens clucked softly in their coop. The world moved around them, indifferent and constant. "Caleb?" Eliza said after a while. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not asking more than I could give." He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "You could have demanded things from me. Rights, expectations. Most men would have." "I'm not most men." "No," she said softly. "You're not." Another week passed. The garden sprouted, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil like promises. Eliza tended them with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything else. Caleb found himself making excuses to work near the house, to be within sight of her, though he couldn't say exactly why. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Eliza spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Why did you come out here? To Montana, I mean. What were you running from?" Caleb stared into the flames, watching them dance and shift. My family, my father, mostly. What did he do? Nothing. Everything. He had expectations about what kind of man I should be, what kind of life I should live. I didn't fit them. So I left. Do you regret it? Leaving? No. But sometimes I wonder if running away was the same as giving up. Eliza was quiet for a moment. I don't think you ran away. I think you chose something different. There's a difference. Maybe. There is, she insisted. Running away is about fear. Choosing something different is about hope, even if it's just a small hope. He looked at her then, really looked at her. In the firelight, her face was softer, the hard edges smoothed by shadow. Is that what you did? Choose something different? I'm trying to. Seems like you're doing all right so far. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the fleeting ghost of one. So are you. That night, as Caleb lay on his blanket by the fire, he listened to the sound of Eliza's breathing from the bed. It had become familiar now, a rhythm he unconsciously tracked as he drifted towards sleep. He thought about what she'd said, about hope, about choosing something different. He'd chosen her, and she'd chosen to stay. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The next morning, he woke to find her already outside working in the garden. He made coffee and brought her a cup. She accepted it with a grateful smile, her hands dirty from the soil. Potatoes are coming up, she said, pointing to a row where green leaves were just beginning to emerge. Good. The beans too, and I think the carrots are starting, though it's hard to tell. You sound proud. I am. She took a sip of coffee. I like seeing things grow. It feels like proof that good things can happen if you work hard enough. Caleb looked at the garden, at the neat rows and the careful work she'd put into it. You did this. You should be proud. She glanced at him, something warm in her eyes. We did this. It's your land, your seeds, your... No, he interrupted gently. This is yours. I gave you dirt and seeds. You gave it life. She didn't argue. She just smiled and went back to work. Later that day, Caleb was in the barn when he heard voices outside. He stepped into the doorway and saw a wagon approaching, an older couple, probably settlers passing through. They pulled to a stop near the house, and the man called out, "Hello there? Anyone home?" Eliza emerged from the garden, wiping her hands on her apron. Caleb walked over to join her. "Afternoon," the man said, tipping his hat. "Name's Henry Foster. This is my wife, Margaret. We're headed north, looking for land. Saw your place and thought we might ask for some water for our horses." "Of course," Caleb said. "Well's just there." While Henry saw to the horses, Margaret climbed down from the wagon, moving stiffly. She was perhaps 60, with gray hair and kind eyes. She looked at Eliza with open curiosity. "You folks live here alone?" Margaret asked. "Yes, ma'am," Eliza said. "Just the two of us." "Must be hard work keeping a place like this." "It is, but it's good work." Margaret smiled. "I can see that. Your garden's coming along nicely." "Thank you." Henry finished with the horses and joined them. "Much obliged for the water. We won't trouble you further." "It's no trouble," Caleb said. "You're welcome to rest a bit before you move on." Margaret looked at her husband, then back at Caleb and Eliza. "That's kind of you, but we should keep going. Trying to make it to the next settlement before dark." She paused. "You two take care of each other, you hear? It's a hard country for those who go it alone." "We will," Eliza said softly. They watched the wagon roll away, disappearing into the trees. When they were alone again, Eliza turned to Caleb. "She seemed nice." "She did. Do you think they'll make it? Find land? Build something?" "If they work as hard as you do, they've got a chance." Eliza looked at him, surprised. "You really think I work hard?" "Eliza, you work harder than anyone I've ever met, including me." She ducked her head, but he could see the pleasure in her expression. "I just do what needs doing. That's what hard work is." That evening, after supper, Eliza did something unexpected. She went to the small shelf where Caleb kept his few books and pulled one down. "Would you mind if I read?" "Course not. They're there for using." She settled into the chair by the fire, opened the book, and began to read silently. Caleb watched her for a moment, then picked up his own work. A piece of leather he was shaping into new reins for the horse. They sat together in comfortable silence, each occupied with their own task but aware of the other's presence. After a while, Eliza spoke without looking up from her book. "This is nice." "What is?" "This. Just being, not having to perform or prove anything." Caleb set down his work. "You never have to prove anything to me." "I know. That's what makes it nice." She went back to her reading, and he went back to his leather work. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The world continued its slow turning. And inside the small house, two people who had started as strangers began to understand what it meant to build a life together. Not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through quiet moments and shared work and the slow, steady accumulation of trust. They were learning each other, learning the rhythms and patterns, the silences and small conversations. Learning that marriage wasn't about completion or rescue. It was about choosing every day to show up and do the work and build something that might last. It was about being seen, being known, being enough exactly as you were. And for both of them, that was something worth staying for. The sound came in the middle of the night, faint but persistent, a rustling near the chicken coop followed by a sharp squawk that cut through the darkness. Caleb woke instantly, his hand already reaching for the rifle beside his blanket. Across the room, he heard Eliza sit up in bed. "What is it?" she whispered. "Something's after the chickens. Stay inside." He was on his feet before she could respond, moving toward the door with the rifle in his hands. The night air hit him cold and sharp as he stepped onto the porch. The moon was half full, casting enough light to see shapes but not details. He heard the rustling again, more frantic now, and the panicked clucking of the hens. Caleb moved quickly but quietly toward the coop, his eyes scanning the darkness. Then he saw it. A shape low to the ground, sleek and quick. A fox, probably, or maybe a coyote. It was trying to dig under the fence he'd reinforced just last week. He raised the rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. The shape yelped and bolted into the trees, disappearing before he could get off a second shot. Caleb waited, listening for any sign it might return, but there was only silence and the agitated sounds of the chickens settling. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Eliza appeared on the porch, holding a lantern. "Did you get it?" "Winged it, maybe. It won't come back tonight." She crossed the clearing and joined him at the coop, holding the lantern high so they could inspect the damage. The fence was intact, but there were fresh claw marks in the dirt where the animal had been digging. Inside, the chickens were ruffled but unharmed. "They're all right," Eliza said, relief clear in her voice. "I was worried. They're fine. But we'll need to reinforce this corner tomorrow. Can't have every predator in the territory thinking this is easy pickings." She nodded, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You moved fast. Had to." "No, I mean, you didn't hesitate. You just protected them." Caleb lowered the rifle. "They're our responsibility. That's what you do." She was quiet for a moment, the lantern light flickering across her face. Not everyone would see it that way. Then not everyone should have chickens. A small smile crossed her lips. "Come on, let's get back inside before we freeze." They walked back to the cabin together, and Caleb secured the door behind them. He set the rifle down and noticed Eliza was still standing in the middle of the room, the lantern in her hands, watching him. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I feel safe here. With you. I wanted you to know that." Something shifted in his chest, warm and unexpected. "Good. That's how it should be." She set the lantern on the table and returned to bed. Caleb lay back down on his blanket, staring at the ceiling. He could still hear her breathing, steady and calm now, and he realized that somewhere in the past few weeks, this had become normal. Her presence, her voice, the way she moved through the space they shared, it had all become part of the rhythm of his life. He fell asleep thinking about safety, about responsibility, about the strange weight of caring for something beyond himself. Morning came with the smell of rain. Dark clouds hung low over the mountains, and the wind carried the promise of a storm. Caleb went out early to check the animals and make sure everything was secure. When he returned, Eliza was making breakfast, her movements efficient and practiced. "Storm's coming," he said, shaking water from his hair. "I figured. The chickens are nervous. We should bring in extra firewood. Could last a few days." She nodded and handed him a plate of eggs and bread. They ate quickly, both aware of the work ahead. After breakfast, Caleb went to chop wood while Eliza gathered what she could from the garden. Early lettuce, a few radishes that had come up faster than expected. By midday, the rain started. It came in sheets, driven sideways by wind that howled through the trees and rattled the windows. Caleb and Eliza worked together to secure the barn door and move the chickens to a more sheltered section of the coop. By the time they made it back to the cabin, they were both soaked through. "Get out of those wet clothes," Caleb said, dripping on the floor. "I'll build up the fire." Eliza disappeared into the storeroom while he stripped off his wet shirt and hung it near the fireplace. He added logs to the fire until it roared, filling the room with warmth. When Eliza emerged, she was wearing a dry dress, her hair loose and damp around her shoulders. She moved to the window and looked out at the rain. "I've never seen it come down this hard. Mountain storms, they hit fast and mean. How long will it last? Day or two? Maybe 3. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from something else. Unease, perhaps, or the strange intimacy of being trapped inside together with nowhere else to go. "What do we do?" "We wait. Keep the fire going. Make sure nothing leaks." He paused. "And we don't go outside unless we have to. This kind of storm, it's easy to get turned around, lose your bearings." I wasn't planning on it. They spent the afternoon in relative silence, each finding small tasks to occupy themselves. Eliza mended clothes that had been torn from work. Caleb sharpened tools and oiled the rifle. The rain continued without pause, drumming against the roof and walls like 1,000 urgent fingers. By evening, the storm had intensified. Lightning split the sky, and thunder followed close behind, shaking the cabin's foundation. Eliza flinched at a particularly loud crack, and Caleb noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she set down her sewing. "You afraid of storms?" he asked. "Not usually, but this one feels different, angrier. It's just weather." "I know, but still." She looked at him. "Does nothing scare you?" He considered the question. "Plenty of things scare me. I just don't see the point in showing it." "Like what?" "Failing. Being alone again. Letting someone down who's counting on me." She seemed surprised by his honesty. "You won't fail." "How do you know?" "Because you care too much. People who care that much find a way." He wanted to believe her. Instead, he stood and went to check the door, making sure it was properly latched. When he turned back, Eliza was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. I'm just glad I'm here, with you, instead of somewhere else." "Where else would you be?" "I don't know. Somewhere worse, probably. Alone in some boarding house, working myself to death just to afford a room and a meal. Or—" She stopped, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. I'm here now." "And you're safe," Caleb said firmly. "That's what matters." The storm raged through the night and into the next day. They rationed their supplies carefully, knowing they might be stuck inside longer than expected. Eliza cooked simple meals, and they ate by the fire, listening to the rain and wind battle against the cabin walls. On the second day, something changed. The rain eased slightly, though the wind remained fierce. Caleb was replacing a bucket under a small leak in the corner when he heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A faint, high-pitched cry, almost like a child's voice. He froze, listening. There it was again, distant but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" Eliza asked, coming to stand beside him. "Yeah." They moved to the window together, peering out through the rain-streaked glass. At first there was nothing but gray sheets of water and wind-bent trees. Then Caleb saw movement near the edge of the clearing, 2 small figures stumbling through the mud, barely visible through the storm. "There," he said, pointing. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. "Those are children." Caleb was already moving, grabbing his coat and the rifle. "Stay here." "Like hell I will." She grabbed her own coat and followed him out into the storm. The rain hit them like a wall, cold and relentless, but they pushed forward. As they got closer, the figures became clearer. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, half carrying a younger girl who couldn't have been more than 5. Both were soaked, shivering, their clothes torn and muddy. The boy saw them and stumbled, nearly falling. "Please," he called out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Please help us." Caleb reached them first. He scooped up the little girl without a word, feeling how light she was, how violently she was shaking. Eliza wrapped her arms around the boy, supporting his weight as they all rushed back toward the cabin. Inside, Caleb set the girl down near the fire, while Eliza helped the boy to a chair. Both children were in bad shape, pale, trembling, their lips tinged blue from cold. The girl's eyes were half closed, and she wasn't fully conscious. "Get blankets," Caleb said, "and warm water if we have it." Eliza moved quickly, gathering everything they had. She wrapped the girl in a thick quilt while Caleb worked on removing the boy's wet clothes, replacing them with a dry shirt that hung almost to his knees. "What's your name?" Caleb asked gently. The boy's teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. Jonah. My sister. Her name's Lily." "How long have you been out there?" I don't know. Since yesterday, maybe. We were with our uncle, but the wagon, there was an accident. It went off the trail. He told us to run, to find help, but..." His voice broke. "I couldn't carry her anymore. I thought we were going to die." Eliza knelt beside the little girl, checking her pulse, her breathing. "She's alive, but she's in bad shape. We need to get her warm, fast." She looked at Caleb, and he saw the question in her eyes. He gave a small nod, understanding what she was asking. Eliza carefully lifted Lily and carried her to the bed, laying her down and piling blankets on top of her. She climbed in beside the girl, using her own body heat to warm her. Caleb stayed with Jonah, rubbing his arms and back to help circulation return. The boy's shivering gradually lessened, and color began to return to his face. "Your uncle," Caleb said quietly. "Where is he?" Jonah's eyes filled with tears. "I think he's dead. The wagon rolled. I heard him yelling, but then... nothing. I tried to go back, but Lily was crying and I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing. You kept your sister alive. That took courage." "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave." Jonah looked up at him, his young face etched with exhaustion and grief. "Are you going to send us away?" The question hit Caleb harder than he expected. He glanced at Eliza, who was still in the bed with Lily, stroking the girl's hair and whispering soft, soothing words. Then he looked back at Jonah. "No," he said. "You're staying here, both of you, for as long as you need." Jonah's face crumpled, and he started to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond simple relief. Caleb pulled the boy close, letting him cry against his shoulder, feeling the small body shake with emotion. Across the room, Eliza met his eyes over Lily's sleeping form. There was something in her expression, gratitude maybe, or recognition, or the beginning of something neither of them had names for yet. She gave him a small nod, and he understood. They were keeping these children. Whatever it took, however long it lasted, they were keeping them. The storm continued through the night, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The space that had belonged to 2 people learning to live together now held 4. Caleb sat in the chair by the fire, watching over Jonah, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the floor wrapped in blankets. Eliza remained in the bed with Lily, monitoring the girl's breathing, occasionally placing a hand on her forehead to check for fever. Around midnight, Lily woke with a small cry. Eliza was there immediately, murmuring soft reassurances. "Shh, sweetheart, you're safe now. You're warm and safe." "Where's Jonah?" the girl asked, her voice small and frightened. "He's right here. See? He's sleeping. He's safe too." Lily's eyes found her brother, and she seemed to relax slightly. "Where are we?" "You're in our home. My name is Eliza, and that's Caleb. We're going to take care of you. Is Uncle Peter here?" Eliza's eyes flicked to Caleb, uncertain. He stood and moved closer to the bed, kneeling so he was at Lily's eye level. "Your uncle was hurt," he said gently. "Your brother brought you here to keep you safe. You're going to stay with us for a while. Is that all right?" Lily looked at him with eyes too old for her small face. Is he dead? Caleb wouldn't lie to her. I don't know. But when the storm clears, I'll go look for him. I promise. She nodded slowly, then her eyes drifted closed again. Within moments, she was asleep. Eliza carefully extracted herself from the bed and joined Caleb by the fire. They stood close together, their voices low so as not to wake the children. What are we going to do? She whispered. What we said. Take care of them. For how long? As long as it takes. Caleb, we don't know anything about raising children. We barely know how to live with each other. We'll figure it out. Same way we've figured out everything else. She looked at the sleeping forms, Jonah on the floor, Lily in the bed. They've lost everything. So did we. We know what that's like. It's different with children. Is it? He turned to face her fully. They need food, shelter, someone to give a damn if they live or die. We can provide that. It's more than just survival, Caleb. They need... She struggled for the word. They need to feel like they matter, like they're wanted. Then we make them feel that way. How? We're barely... She stopped, shaking her head. We're still learning how to be married, how to be anything to each other, and now we're supposed to be parents? We don't have to be perfect. We just have to try. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between the children and Caleb. Finally, she spoke. When you chose me in that church, did you ever imagine this? No. Are you sorry? He reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd done so since they'd signed the marriage license. Her fingers were cold and small in his, but they didn't pull away. I'm not sorry, he said, about any of it. She squeezed his hand and they stood there in the firelight, holding on to each other while two orphaned children slept, and the storm raged outside and the future loomed uncertain and strange. By morning, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Caleb left Eliza with the children and went out to assess the damage. Several tree branches had come down, and there was flooding near the creek, but the cabin and barn had held strong. The chickens were wet and irritable, but alive. When he returned, he found Eliza in the kitchen with both children awake. Jonah was sitting at the table, watching her with cautious eyes. Lily was in the chair beside him, holding a rag doll that must have been in her pocket when they arrived. Morning, Caleb said. Morning, Jonah replied quietly. Eliza set bowls of warm porridge in front of them. Eat, both of you. The children ate hungrily, barely pausing between bites. Caleb sat down across from them and waited until they'd finished before speaking. Jonah, I need you to tell me everything you remember about the accident. Where it happened, which direction you came from. Anything that might help me find your uncle. The boy set down his spoon, his expression serious. We were on the old mountain trail, the one that goes north toward Helena. The wagon wheel hit something, a rock maybe, and it tipped. Uncle Peter yelled for us to jump. I grabbed Lily and we rolled down the slope. When I looked back, the wagon was on its side and the horses were screaming. Uncle Peter was underneath. How far from here? I don't know. We walked for a long time, through the trees, following the sound of water. I thought if we found water, we'd find people. Smart thinking, Caleb said. That probably saved your lives. Jonah didn't look like he felt smart. He looked like he felt lost. Are you really going to look for him? I said I would. What if you can't find him? Then I'll keep looking until I know for certain what happened. You deserve that much. Lily spoke up, her voice small. If Uncle Peter's gone, where will we go? Eliza came to stand beside the table, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. You'll stay here, for as long as you need. But we don't have any money. We can't pay you. We're not asking you to pay us, Caleb said. You're children. You need help. That's all that matters. Jonah looked between them, suspicion and hope warring in his expression. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. Because it's the right thing to do, Eliza said simply. And because this house has room for more than just the two of us. Caleb stood. I'm going to search for your uncle. Eliza will stay here with you. If I'm not back by nightfall, don't worry. It might take time. Can I come with you? Jonah asked. No. You need to rest and your sister needs you here. I'll move faster alone. The boy looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. Will you tell him? If you find him, will you tell him we're safe? I will. Caleb gathered his rifle, some rope, and a canteen. Eliza walked him to the door, her expression worried. Be careful, she said quietly. Always am. I mean it, Caleb. That trail is dangerous even without storm damage. I know, but I have to try. She reached out and touched his arm, just briefly. I know, just come back. I will. He stepped out into the drizzle and began making his way north, following the creek toward the mountain trail. The ground was soft and treacherous, muddy from days of rain. Trees had fallen across the path, and he had to climb over or around them, moving slowly to avoid injury. After 2 hours of hard walking, he found the wagon. It was worse than he'd expected. Completely overturned, one wheel shattered, supplies scattered across the muddy slope. One of the horses was dead, still tangled in the traces. The other was nowhere to be seen, probably run off in panic. And beneath the wagon, partially buried in mud and debris, he found Peter. The man was dead, had been for at least a day, judging by the condition of the body. Caleb stood there for a long moment, rain dripping from his hat, staring at the wreckage and thinking about 2 children who'd just lost the last family they had. He couldn't leave the body here. It wouldn't be right. So he spent the next hour digging Peter free, using his hands and a piece of broken board. When he'd finally pulled him clear, he wrapped the body in a tarp from the scattered supplies and secured it with rope. The trip back took twice as long with the weight of the dead man slung over his shoulders. By the time he reached the homestead, the sun was setting and his muscles were screaming with exhaustion. Eliza met him at the door, her eyes going immediately to the tarp-wrapped bundle. She didn't ask. She already knew. The children? Caleb asked. Asleep, both of them. They wore themselves out crying. He nodded and carried the body to the barn, laying it carefully in an empty stall. He'd bury it tomorrow, when he had daylight and strength. For now, he was done. Inside the cabin, Eliza had water warming and a clean shirt laid out. He washed in silence while she prepared food. They ate without speaking, both aware of the weight of what had happened, what it meant. Finally, Eliza broke the silence. They're orphans now. Yes. What happens to them? That depends. On what? Caleb met her eyes across the table. On whether we keep them. She didn't look surprised. You want to keep them. I want to give them a choice they didn't have before. A place to belong. Caleb, we can't just... We're not their parents. We don't have any legal right. They don't have anyone else. No other family, from what Jonah said. So either we keep them, or we send them to an orphanage where they'll be separated and forgotten. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. This is a big decision. I know. It changes everything. I know that too. She looked toward the bed where both children were sleeping, curled together for comfort. When she turned back to Caleb, there were tears in her eyes. I'm scared. So am I. What if we fail them? Then we fail them. But at least we tried. At least they knew someone cared enough to try. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When did you become so certain about all this? The moment I saw them in the storm. The moment I watched you climb into that bed to keep Lily warm. We're already keeping them, Eliza. We made that choice the second we brought them inside. Now, we're just deciding whether to make it permanent. She was quiet for a long time, thinking. Then she nodded slowly. All right, we keep them. You're sure? No, but I'm sure I don't want to send them away, so I guess that's the same thing. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand again. This time she held on tight. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing stars beyond. And inside the small cabin, a family was beginning to form, fragile and uncertain, held together by choice rather than blood, but real nonetheless. 2 people who'd been unwanted had found each other. And now they'd found 2 children who needed exactly what they had to offer. A place to belong, a chance to matter. A home. Morning came quiet and heavy. Caleb woke before dawn and went to the barn alone. He'd chosen a spot on the hill behind the cabin, beneath a pine tree that had probably stood for 100 years. The ground was still soft from the rain, which made the digging easier, though not easy. He worked methodically, his muscles remembering the rhythm from other graves he'd dug in other places he'd rather forget. By the time the sun cleared the mountains, he'd finished. He stood at the edge of the grave, looking down at the tarp-wrapped body, and thought about how to tell two children their last remaining family was gone. Eliza appeared at his side, silent as morning mist. She held a small wooden cross Jonah must have made from scrap lumber. He asked if he could say goodbye. Caleb nodded and turned to find both children standing a few yards away, holding hands. Jonah's face was stoic, carved from determination and grief. Lily's eyes were red from crying, but she wasn't crying now. They approached slowly, and Caleb stepped back to give them space. Jonah knelt at the edge of the grave and placed his hand on the tarp. "Uncle Peter," the boy said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry I couldn't help you. I'm sorry I ran. But I kept Lily safe like you told me to. And we found good people. So you don't have to worry about us anymore." Lily placed her rag doll beside her brother's hand. "Goodbye, Uncle Peter." Eliza moved forward and gently guided the children back. Caleb and Jonah worked together to lower the body, then began filling the grave. The boy insisted on helping, his small hands pushing dirt with the determination that made Caleb's chest ache. When it was done, they stood together, 4 people who hadn't been a family a week ago, and Eliza spoke quietly. "May he rest in peace, and may those he loved remember him with gratitude." Jonah pushed the cross into the soft earth at the head of the grave. It stood crooked but firm, a marker for a man who died trying to save the children in his care. They walked back to the cabin in silence. Inside, Eliza made breakfast while Caleb stoked the fire. The children sat at the table, subdued and distant, processing a loss too big for their small bodies to hold. After they'd eaten, Caleb cleared his throat. "Jonah, Lily, we need to talk about what happens next." Both children looked up, fear flickering in their eyes. "You have choices," Caleb continued. "If you have other families somewhere, we can try to find them, or there's an orphanage in Helena. It's not close, but—" "No." Jonah's voice was sharp. "They'll split us up. That's what they do. I won't let them take Lily." "Then you stay here," Eliza said firmly. "With us. For as long as you need." Lily's voice was small. "Forever?" Eliza glanced at Caleb, and something passed between them, a question, an answer, an understanding. "If that's what you want," she said, "then yes, forever." Jonah studied them both with the suspicious wisdom of a child who'd learned not to trust easy promises. "Why would you do that? You don't know us. We can't work like adults. We'll just be mouths to feed." "You're children," Caleb said. "You're not supposed to be able to work like adults, and yes, you'll need feeding. That's what children need, food and shelter and people who give a damn. But we're not yours." "No," Eliza said gently, "but maybe we could be, if you wanted that." Lily looked at her brother, waiting for his decision. Jonah was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too difficult to swallow. Finally he spoke. "What would we call you?" The question caught both Caleb and Eliza off guard. They exchanged glances again. "Whatever feels right to you," Caleb said. "Caleb and Eliza are fine, or—" He paused, the words strange in his mouth. "Or Ma and Pa, if you wanted. Eventually. When it feels true." It doesn't feel true yet," Jonah said, honestly. "That's all right. It doesn't have to. Not today." Lily spoke up. "Can I help with the chickens?" Eliza smiled, and it transformed her face. "I was hoping you would. They're temperamental creatures. They need someone with a gentle touch." "I can be gentle." "I know you can, sweetheart." The conversation shifted then, moving from heavy decisions to practical matters. What chores the children could help with, where they would sleep, what they needed that the homestead didn't have. It was easier to talk about the tangible things, the immediate problems with immediate solutions. That night, Caleb and Eliza worked together to clear out the storeroom. It was small, barely big enough for 2 narrow beds, but it had a window and 4 walls and a door the children could close if they needed privacy. They hung blankets as curtains and moved in the few belongings Jonah and Lily had salvaged from the wagon wreck, some clothes, a few books, the rag doll. When it was ready, Lily walked in and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "This is ours?" "All yours," Eliza said. "I've never had my own room before." "Well, you do now." Jonah stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Thank you, he said stiffly, for all of this. You're welcome, Caleb replied. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start teaching you how things work around here. The children settled into their new room, and Caleb and Eliza retreated to the main cabin. For the first time in days, they were alone together, and the silence felt different, charged with everything that had happened, everything that had changed. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. We really did it. We took in 2 orphans. We did. Are we insane? Probably. She laughed, a short, breathless sound. I don't know the first thing about being a mother. And I don't know the first thing about being a father. We'll figure it out together. What if we can't? What if we mess them up worse than they already are? Caleb sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Then we'll do our best to fix it. That's all anyone can do. She leaned against him, just slightly, and he felt the weight of her trust settle over him like a blanket. When you chose me in that church, did you ever imagine any of this? No, but I'm not sorry it happened. Neither am I. She paused. It's strange, isn't it? A few weeks ago I was alone, unwanted. Now I'm a wife and a mother to 2 children I barely know. It doesn't feel real. It's real. You're real. This is all real. She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Caleb, I need to tell you something. All right? I'm not good at this. At letting people in. At trusting that they won't leave or hurt me or decide I'm not worth the trouble. But you, her voice caught. You've never asked me to be anything other than what I am, and I don't know how to thank you for that. He reached out and took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar now. You don't have to thank me. You just have to stay. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Because I need you here. Those kids need you here. They need you too. Then I guess we need each other. She squeezed his hand and they sat together in the firelight, 2 broken people who'd somehow found a way to build something whole. The days that followed developed a new rhythm. Mornings began with Caleb building the fire while Eliza prepared breakfast. The children woke slowly, Lily usually appearing first with sleep-tangled hair and her doll clutched tight. Jonah followed, watchful and quiet, always positioning himself between his sister and potential harm. Caleb taught Jonah how to care for the horse, how to mend fence, how to split wood properly so it wouldn't kick back and split your skull. The boy learned quickly, his hands remembering work he must have done before, his body adapting to the rhythm of labor. Eliza took Lily under her wing, teaching her to collect eggs, to pull weeds without damaging the vegetables, to knead bread dough until it was smooth and elastic. The girl was careful and precise, following instructions exactly, as if afraid that one mistake would make her unwelcome. You don't have to be perfect, Eliza told her one morning as they worked in the garden. You just have to try. But what if I do it wrong? Then we'll fix it. That's what mistakes are for, learning. Lily considered this, her small hands buried in the dirt. Mama used to say that mistakes were for stupid people. Eliza's chest tightened. Your mama was wrong. Mistakes are for everyone. Even smart people make them. Especially smart people because they're trying hard things. Really? Really? The girl seemed to relax slightly, her movements becoming less rigid, more natural. She pulled a weed and held it up triumphantly. Like this? Exactly like that. You're doing wonderfully. At night, after supper, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Caleb read aloud from one of his books. Adventure stories mostly, about explorers and pioneers. Jonah listened with fierce concentration while Lily curled against Eliza's side, her eyes half closed but determined to stay awake. Other times, they simply sat in comfortable silence, each person occupied with their own thoughts, but together in the quiet. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Jonah finally spoke what had been weighing on him. Uncle Peter wasn't a good man. Everyone looked at him. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. What do you mean? Caleb asked carefully. He drank, a lot. And when he drank, he got mean. He never hit us, but he said things, told us we were burdens, that he was stuck with us because our parents died and nobody else would take us. Lily had gone very still against Eliza's side. Sometimes he'd disappear for days, Jonah continued, leave us alone in whatever room he'd rented. We learned to be quiet, to not ask for things, because asking made him angry. "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "You deserve better than that." "I know, but he was all we had, and then—" His voice cracked. "And then he died trying to save us. So I don't know what to feel." Caleb set down the piece of wood he'd been whittling. "You can feel both things at once. Angry that he wasn't better to you, and grateful that he tried to keep you safe at the end. People aren't all good or all bad. They're complicated." "Were your parents complicated?" The question surprised Caleb. He thought about his father, about the impossible expectations and the cold disappointment, about the way love had been conditional on obedience. "Yeah, they were." "Do you miss them?" "Sometimes. Not often, but sometimes." Jonah nodded, seeming to understand. "I miss my real parents, the ones who died when I was little. I don't remember them much, but I miss them anyway. Is that strange?" "No," Eliza said. "It's not strange at all. You can miss the idea of them, the way things should have been." "Is that what you do? Miss the way things should have been?" She looked at him, this serious boy with too much weight on his shoulders. "I used to, but now I'm trying to focus on the way things are, and the way they could be." "And how are they?" "Better than they were, and getting better every day." Lily had fallen asleep against Eliza's shoulder. Caleb stood and carefully lifted the girl, carrying her to the children's room. Jonah followed, and together they tucked Lily into bed. The boy lingered in the doorway, watching as Caleb adjusted the blanket. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For letting us stay. For not sending us away." "You don't have to thank me." "I know, but I want to." Caleb placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the thin bones beneath the shirt. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we're going to work on the north fence. It needs serious repair." "I'll be ready." "I know you will." Back in the main room, Eliza was cleaning up from supper. Caleb helped her dry the dishes, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice. When everything was put away, she turned to him. "He's a good boy. They both are." "They are. They're starting to trust us." Slowly. "It's enough." She paused. "Caleb, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "Go ahead." "The bed. You've been sleeping on the floor for weeks now. Your back must be killing you." He shrugged. "I've slept in worse places." "I know, but you don't have to anymore." She met his eyes directly. "We're married. We're raising children together. We're building a life. Maybe it's time we—" She paused, choosing her words. "Maybe it's time we acted like married people." His heart beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the bed is big enough for both of us, and I trust you. I think I've trusted you for a while now." "Eliza, I'm not asking for anything more than sharing space. Just, I don't want you sleeping on the floor anymore. It doesn't feel right." He studied her face, looking for doubt or obligation, but found only certainty. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." That night, for the first time since they'd married, they shared the bed. They lay on opposite sides, a careful distance between them, both staring at the ceiling. The strangeness of it hummed in the air. "Caleb?" Eliza whispered. "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything." "You too." She rolled onto her side, facing away from him. After a moment, he did the same. The distance between them felt both vast and insignificant. They weren't touching, but they were together, and that was enough. Sleep came slowly, awareness of each other's presence making rest elusive. But eventually, exhaustion won, and they drifted off to the sound of each other's breathing. When Caleb woke in the morning, he found Eliza's hand had crept across the space between them in sleep, her fingers barely brushing his arm. He didn't move, didn't want to wake her, just lay there feeling the small weight of her touch and understanding that something had shifted again. They were becoming something more than strangers sharing a house, more than two people bound by legal contract. They were becoming partners, maybe even something deeper, though neither was ready to name it yet. The weeks passed, marked by the changing season. Spring deepened into early summer. The garden flourished under Eliza's careful attention, producing lettuce, radishes, and the first tiny beans. The chickens laid reliably, and Lily took pride in collecting the eggs each morning, counting them aloud as she placed them in her basket. Jonah grew stronger, his thin frame filling out from regular meals and hard work. He followed Caleb everywhere, absorbing lessons about the land, about survival, about what it meant to build something that would last. The boy rarely smiled, but Caleb caught glimpses of something lighter in his eyes, hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. One afternoon, while they were mending fence together, Jonah spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why did you marry Eliza, really?" Caleb drove a post into the ground, considering the question. "I told you, she was there and nobody else wanted her." "But that's not the whole reason, is it?" The boy was perceptive. "No, it's not." "So what was it?" Caleb paused his work and looked at Jonah directly. "I saw something in her that reminded me of myself. Someone who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't worth choosing. And I thought, if I could give her a chance, maybe that would mean something. Maybe we could both be worth something." "And are you? Worth something?" "I'm starting to think so, yeah." Jonah nodded slowly, processing this. "She loves you, you know." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "She tell you that?" "She doesn't have to. I see the way she looks at you, the way she smiles when you come back from checking the traps, the way she saves you the last piece of bread because she knows you like it. It's not just anything. It's love. I remember what that looks like. My real parents loved each other like that." Caleb hammered another post, his hands working while his mind raced. Did Eliza love him? Did he love her? They'd built something good together, something real. They shared a bed now, though they still maintained careful distance. They worked side by side, raised children together, laughed at small jokes, and supported each other through hard days. Was that love? Or was it just partnership? "What about you?" Jonah asked. "Do you love her?" The question deserved honesty. "I don't know. I've never felt this before, so I don't know what to call it. But I know I don't want to lose her. I know I wake up grateful she's there. I know when she hurts, I hurt. If that's love, then yeah, I guess I do." "You should tell her." "When the time's right." "When will that be?" Caleb looked at the boy, this serious child who'd lost so much but still had the courage to believe in love. "I don't know, but I'll know when it happens." That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb found Eliza on the porch, looking out at the stars. He joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "Beautiful night," he said. "It is." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets and wind, and the distant call of an owl. "Eliza?" "Hmm?" "I want to give you something." She turned to look at him, curious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, a simple gold band caught the starlight. "I bought this the day after we got married," he said quietly. "Wasn't sure when to give it to you. Wasn't sure you'd want it, but I want you to have it now, if you'll take it." Her hand trembled as she reached for the ring. "Caleb, you don't have to wear it if you don't want to, but I wanted you to know that this, what we have, it's real to me. You're real to me. You're not just the woman I chose because nobody else would. You're the woman I choose every day because you're strong and kind and you make this place feel like home instead of just a house." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I choose you too," she whispered, "every single day." He pulled her into his arms and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither had expected. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza looked up at him with shining eyes. "I love you, Caleb Ward." The words unlocked something in his chest, something he'd been holding back without realizing it. "I love you too, Eliza Ward." She laughed through her tears. "Say it again." "I love you." "Again." "I love you, Eliza. I love you." She kissed him then, soft and tentative and perfect. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. Inside the house, neither of them noticed Jonah standing in the doorway of the children's room, watching with a small smile of his own, before quietly closing the door. The family was real now, not just on paper, not just in practice, but in truth. 4 people who'd all been unwanted, all been lost, had found each other and built something worth keeping. And it was only the beginning. Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it long days of hard work and longer evenings of quiet contentment. The garden exploded with life. Beans climbing their stakes, squash sprawling across the ground, tomatoes ripening from green to red. Eliza worked the rows with Lily at her side, the girls' chatter filling the air with questions about everything from why worms helped the soil to whether chickens could see colors. Caleb and Jonah expanded the fence line, clearing new ground for next year's planting. The boy had grown taller in just a few months, his shoulders broadening, his hands developing the calluses of honest labor. He spoke more now, asked questions, even laughed occasionally when Caleb told stories about his early, clumsy attempts at homesteading. At night, the four of them gathered around the table for supper. Real meals now, with vegetables from the garden and bread that Eliza had perfected through trial and error. Lily always insisted on saying her own version of gratitude before they ate, thanking everything from the chickens to the rain to the family itself. Thank you for the food and the home, and for Caleb and Eliza who keep us safe, and for Jonah, who's the best brother, and for the chickens even though they peck sometimes, she would say, in one long, breathless sentence, and no one had the heart to interrupt her. One evening in late July, as they sat around the table after finishing supper, Jonah cleared his throat. There's something I've been thinking about. Everyone looked at him. We've been here almost 3 months now, he continued, his voice uncertain. And you've been really good to us. Better than we probably deserve. But I was wondering, he paused, gathering courage. Could we maybe call you Ma and Pa, for real? Lily's eyes went wide with hope. She looked at her brother, then at Caleb and Eliza, waiting. Eliza's hand went to her mouth, tears already forming. She nodded, unable to speak. Caleb's voice was rough when he answered. We'd be honored. Really? Lily asked, bouncing slightly in her chair. Really, Caleb confirmed. The girl launched herself at Eliza, wrapping small arms around her waist. I have a ma again, she whispered into Eliza's apron. Eliza held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. Yes, sweetheart, you do. Jonah stood more slowly, looking at Caleb with the same cautious hope he'd had that first night. Caleb stood too and pulled the boy into a firm embrace. Jonah went rigid for a moment, then relaxed, his thin frame shaking with emotion he'd held back for months. Thank you, the boy whispered. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for staying, Caleb replied. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Eliza lay in bed together, the space between them having gradually closed over the weeks until now they slept close, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. We're parents, Eliza said softly. We are. Real parents. As real as it gets. She tilted her head to look at him. Are you scared? Terrified. You? Same. She smiled. But also happier than I've ever been. He kissed her forehead. Me too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who'd found love in the least likely place and built a family from pieces nobody else wanted. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Caleb was in the barn when he heard horses approaching. He stepped outside to see 3 riders, the rancher from town, a man in a suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable on horseback, and someone Caleb recognized as the local law officer. Eliza appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The children came to stand beside her, Jonah instinctively moving in front of his sister. The rancher dismounted with a smirk. Well, well, the hermit's got himself quite the setup now. Wife, kids, playing house. State your business, Caleb said evenly. The man in the suit spoke up. Mr. Ward, my name is Harold Pemberton. I'm an attorney from Helena. I've been retained by the estate of Peter Hutchins to settle his affairs. The children's uncle is dead and buried, Caleb said. What affairs need settling? The matter of his wards, the children Jonah and Lily Hutchins. Jonah's hand found Lily's, gripping tight. Pemberton pulled papers from his saddlebag. Mr. Hutchins had debts, substantial debts. Upon his death, those debts transferred to his estate, which includes any assets or dependents. I've been authorized to collect the children and place them in an institution where they can work off their uncle's obligations. No, Eliza's voice was sharp as broken glass. Absolutely not. The rancher laughed. Lady, You don't get a say. Those kids belong to Hutchins. Now they belong to his creditors. Children don't belong to creditors, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. They're not property. The law says different, Pemberton replied, though he looked uncomfortable. The law says debts must be settled. These children are wards of the deceased's estate. I have the authority to take them. Over my dead body, Eliza said. The law officer finally spoke. Folks, let's keep this civil. Mr. Pemberton has legal documents. If you've got a claim to these children, you'll need to present it proper. We're their parents, Caleb said. You got papers saying so? We took them in, fed them, clothed them, gave them a home. That's charity, not guardianship. Without legal documentation, you've got no standing. Jonah stepped forward, his young face set with determination. We don't want to go. We want to stay here, with our ma and pa. Pemberton's expression softened slightly. Son, I understand you've grown attached, but the law is clear. Your uncle's debts. My uncle was a drunk who told us we were burdens, Jonah interrupted. He didn't care about us when he was alive. Why should his debts matter more than we do now? Because that's how the law works. Then the law is wrong. The rancher stepped forward, reaching for Jonah's arm. Come on, boy. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Caleb moved faster than anyone expected, putting himself between the rancher and the children. Touch them and you'll regret it. The rancher's hand went to his hip, where Caleb noticed a gun for the first time. The law officer noticed too and stepped between them. Everyone calm down. Nobody's touching nobody yet. He looked at Caleb. You got any legal claim to these kids? Adoption papers? Guardianship documents? Anything? No, Caleb admitted. But we can get them. Give us time. How much time? A month. We'll go to Helena, file the proper papers, make it legal. Pemberton shook his head. I have my orders. The children are to be remanded to institutional care immediately. They're not going anywhere, Eliza said, her voice shaking with fury. Not today, not ever. Ma'am, you're interfering with legal proceedings. I'm protecting my children. The law officer sighed. Look, folks, I don't like this any more than you do, but Mr. Pemberton's got the law on his side. You want to keep these kids, you need to file adoption papers, prove you can provide for them, and petition the court for guardianship. Until then, they're technically wards of Hutchins' estate. Caleb's mind raced. How long would the process take? Month, maybe 2, if you can prove financial stability and moral character. And if we can't file in time? Then these children go to the work institution in Helena. They'll stay there until their uncle's debts are paid off. Or they turn 18. Lily started crying, burying her face in Eliza's skirt. Jonah stood rigid, his jaw clenched, looking like he was preparing to fight. Caleb made a decision. Give us 1 week. We'll go to Helena, file the papers, start the process. But the children stay here while we do it. They're not going to any institution. That's not, Pemberton began. 1 week, Caleb repeated, or I make this very difficult for everyone involved. The law officer looked at Pemberton, then at the rancher, then back at Caleb. You threatening a legal officer? I'm making a promise. These children have been through enough. They've lost their parents, their uncle, everything they knew. They finally have a home, a family, stability. You want to rip that away over debts they didn't incur? Fine. Do what you have to do. But I guarantee you'll have a fight on your hands. The rancher sneered. Big talk for a hermit. Try me. Something in Caleb's eyes made the rancher step back. The law officer saw it too and held up his hands. All right, everybody settle. Mr. Ward, you're putting me in a difficult position. I'm asking for 1 week, that's all. Pemberton consulted his papers, clearly conflicted. Finally, he spoke. I could argue that the children are in temporary placement while legal matters are resolved. That would buy time for the guardianship petition to be filed and reviewed. How much time? Eliza asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3, if I delay my report. But after that, if you don't have legal standing, I'll have no choice but to collect them. We'll have the papers filed within a week, Caleb said. It's not just filing. You'll need character references, financial statements, proof of stable housing. The court will want to ensure these children are being placed in an appropriate home. We can provide all that. The law officer nodded slowly. All right. I'm going to pretend I believe you've got a legitimate claim here. But you step 1 foot out of line and I'm coming back with a warrant. Understood? Understood. The 3 men mounted their horses. Before riding off, Pemberton looked down at the children. I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Ward. If you fail to secure legal guardianship, those children will be taken, and there won't be anything I can do to stop it. We won't fail, Eliza said firmly. They watched the riders disappear down the trail. When they were gone, Jonah turned to Caleb. What happens if we can't get the papers in time? We'll get them. But what if we'll get them, Caleb repeated, his voice leaving no room for doubt. I promise you, we're not letting anyone take you away. Lily was still crying. Eliza knelt and pulled her close. Sweetheart, listen to me. We're going to fix this. Your pa and I are going to make sure you and Jonah stay right here where you belong. But they said we have to pay Uncle Peter's debts. Those aren't your debts, and we'll make sure the court understands that. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Lily in Eliza's arms, Jonah clutching a blanket like armor, Caleb and Eliza sat by the fire making plans. We'll leave tomorrow, Caleb said. First thing, take the children with us. I don't trust those men not to come back while we're gone. The trip to Helena takes 3 days each way, plus time to file papers, gather references. We could be gone more than a week. Then we move fast. We file the guardianship petition, get whatever documents we need, and get back before Pemberton's deadline. Eliza twisted the wedding ring on her finger. What if it's not enough? What if the court says we're not suitable parents? Why wouldn't we be? Because I was a widow who did things she's not proud of to survive. Because you're a hermit with no ties to the community. Because we got married under strange circumstances and barely knew each other. We're married now. We have a home, land, income from selling eggs and vegetables. We're providing for these children better than their uncle ever did. But is that enough in the eyes of the law? Caleb reached for her hand. It has to be, because the alternative is unacceptable. They left at dawn. All 4 of them packed onto the horse and a borrowed mule. The journey was hard, long days of travel with 2 children who were scared and exhausted. But they pressed on, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Helena was bigger than Caleb remembered, bustling with people and noise. They found a boarding house that would take all 4 of them and paid for 3 nights. Then they went straight to the courthouse. The clerk was a tired-looking woman with ink-stained fingers. She listened to their story without expression, then pulled out the necessary forms. Petition for legal guardianship, she said, sliding papers across the counter. You'll need to fill these out completely. List your assets, income, living situation. You'll need 3 character references from upstanding citizens. And you'll need to appear before Judge Morrison for a hearing. How long until we can get a hearing? Caleb asked. Judge is backed up. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. We don't have 3 weeks. We need this settled now. The clerk looked at him over her spectacles. Everyone who comes in here needs it settled now. The law doesn't work on your schedule, Mr. Ward. Eliza stepped forward. Please. There are men trying to take our children to a work institution. We're their legal guardians in every way that matters. We just need the papers to prove it. Then you should have filed sooner. We didn't know we needed to. Their uncle just died. We took them in because it was the right thing to do. Are we being punished for that? The clerk's expression softened slightly. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm explaining how the system works, but she paused, thinking. Judge Morrison sometimes hears emergency petitions on Fridays. That's tomorrow. If you can get your paperwork completed and your references gathered by then, I could add you to the docket. What time? Court starts at 9. Emergency petitions are usually heard last, so probably afternoon. We'll be there, Caleb said. They spent the rest of the day frantically gathering what they needed. The first reference came from the shopkeeper who'd sold them supplies, a man who remembered Caleb as honest and Eliza as hardworking. The second came from the couple they'd given water to, the Fosters, who happened to be staying in Helena temporarily. The third was harder until they thought of the preacher who'd married them. They found him at the church, the same thin man with the too-tight collar. He remembered them immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Ward, I didn't expect to see you again. We need a favor, Caleb said, then explained the situation. The preacher listened, his expression thoughtful. So you're asking me to vouch for your character as parents? Yes? To children you've known for less than 3 months. Children who had no one else. Children we love. The preacher studied them both. When you came to me for a marriage license, I had my doubts. Miss Monroe was, well, she was the last woman anyone wanted. And you, Mr. Ward, you seemed like a man running from something. I performed the ceremony because it was my duty, but I didn't expect it to last. We're still together, Eliza said quietly. I can see that. And these children, you truly love them? With everything we have, Caleb replied. The preacher nodded slowly. Then I'll write your reference. Not because I expected you to succeed, but because clearly you have, and that's worth supporting. That night, with all their documents prepared, Caleb and Eliza sat in their small boarding house room while the children slept. They went over the forms again and again, making sure everything was perfect. What if it's not enough? Eliza whispered. It will be. You don't know that. I know that we're fighting for our family. That has to count for something. She leaned against him, exhausted and scared. I never knew I could feel this way, so terrified of losing something. That's what love does. It makes you vulnerable. I hate it. He smiled despite the fear gnawing at his gut. No, you don't. No, she admitted. I don't. But I hate that someone could take them from us. They won't. We won't let them. The next morning, they dressed in their best clothes and went to the courthouse. The building was imposing, tall stone columns, heavy doors, the weight of law and authority pressing down on everyone who entered. They sat in the courtroom for hours, watching other cases be heard. Property disputes, criminal proceedings, contract disagreements. The judge was an older man with white hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Finally, the clerk called their names. Ward Family Guardianship Petition. They stood, bringing the children with them. Caleb carried the folder of documents. Eliza held Lily's hand while Jonah walked close beside her. The judge looked down at them from his bench. Mr. and Mrs. Ward, you're petitioning for legal guardianship of Jonah and Lily Hutchins, previously wards of the deceased Peter Hutchins. Yes, Your Honor, Caleb said. I have a competing claim from attorney Harold Pemberton representing the Hutchins estate creditors. They're arguing these children should be remanded to institutional care to work off estate debts. That's barbaric, Eliza said before she could stop herself. The judge raised an eyebrow. Perhaps. But it's also legal in certain circumstances. Mr. Pemberton, state your case. Pemberton stood and presented his argument, debts owed, legal precedent, the estate's right to assets including dependent wards. It was cold and clinical, reducing Jonah and Lily to line items in an accounting book. When he finished, the judge turned to Caleb. Your response, Mr. Ward. Caleb stepped forward, his hand shaking slightly as he presented their documents. Your Honor, my wife and I took these children in when they had nowhere else to go. Their uncle died in an accident, and they showed up at our door in the middle of a storm, half dead from cold and fear. We gave them shelter, food, clothing, and love. We've raised them for 3 months. They call us Ma and Pa. We're asking the court to recognize what's already true, that we're their family. You've been married less than 4 months yourself, the judge observed. Yes, sir. That's not much time to prove stability. It's enough time to know what matters. Family matters. These children matter. The judge looked at the children. Jonah, Lily, step forward, please. They did, hand in hand, terrified but trying to be brave. Jonah, you're the older one. Do you understand what's happening here? Yes, sir. Some people want to take us away to work off debts that weren't ours, and our Ma and Pa are fighting to keep us. Is that what you want? To stay with Mr. and Mrs. Ward? Yes, sir. More than anything. Even though you've only known them a short time, time doesn't matter when someone shows you they care. They've shown us every single day. The judge turned to Lily. And you, young lady? Lily's voice was small but certain. I want to stay with my Ma and Pa. They're good to us. They love us. Please don't send us away. The judge was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the papers. Finally, he spoke. This court recognizes that while the Hutchins estate has legal claims regarding debts, those claims do not extend to human beings. Children are not property to be seized and worked. Furthermore, this court finds that Mr. and Mrs. Ward have demonstrated sufficient stability, resources, and moral character to serve as legal guardians. Eliza's knees went weak. Caleb grabbed her hand. However, the judge continued, this is a preliminary ruling. Full adoption will require a 6-month probationary period during which the court will verify continued stability and appropriate care. At the end of that period, if all requirements are met, full legal adoption will be granted. Until then, the Wards are appointed temporary legal guardians with full parental rights and responsibilities. The Hutchins estate creditor's claim is denied. Pemberton started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Mr. Pemberton, if you wish to appeal, you may do so through the proper channels, but these children are not leaving with you today. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded like freedom. Lily burst into tears and threw herself at Eliza. Jonah hugged Caleb with the fierce desperation of someone who'd been holding their breath for hours. Eliza was crying too, and Caleb felt his own eyes burning as he held his family close. They'd won. They'd actually won. Outside the courthouse, Pemberton approached them. Congratulations, Mr. Ward. You fought hard for them. They're worth fighting for. I hope you understand I was just doing my job. I understand. But if you come near my family again, job or not, we're going to have problems. Pemberton nodded and walked away. The journey home took longer because they kept stopping to celebrate, to breathe, to marvel at what they'd accomplished. When they finally rode into their clearing 5 days later, the homestead looked different, not in any physical way, but in the way it felt. It was truly home now, protected and permanent. That night, Caleb made the children a promise. 6 months from now, when the probation period ends, we're going to have a proper celebration. We'll invite the neighbors, have a real party. We'll make it official in every way. Can we have cake? Lily asked. The biggest cake you've ever seen. And can we plant a tree? Jonah added. Something that'll grow as we grow, so we remember this day. That's a perfect idea, Eliza said. We'll plant it tomorrow. They did. The whole family worked together to dig the hole, plant a young pine sapling, and water it thoroughly. As they stood back to admire their work, Lily spoke up. This tree is like us. It started small and alone, but it's going to grow strong because it has good soil and people who care for it. That's exactly right, sweetheart, Eliza said, pulling her close. The months passed in a rhythm of work and laughter and slow, steady growth. Summer faded into autumn and the harvest was abundant. They worked together to preserve vegetables, smoke meat, prepare for winter. Jonah grew tall enough to look Caleb almost in the eye. Lily's vocabulary expanded to include words like photosynthesis and migration, picked up from the books Eliza read to her each night. And through it all, Caleb and Eliza grew closer. The careful distance they'd maintained at first disappeared entirely. They shared not just a bed, but their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. They made love with tenderness and passion, discovering each other slowly, building intimacy that went deeper than physical connection. One night in late autumn, as they lay tangled together after the children were asleep, Eliza spoke into the darkness. Do you remember what you said when you chose me? That I was there? I remember. I've been thinking about that. About how sometimes the simplest reasons are the truest ones. You chose me because I was there, but you kept choosing me every day after. That's what matters. I'll keep choosing you, Caleb said, for the rest of my life. Promise? I promise. She kissed him, soft and deep, and they made love again, slowly, savoring each moment. When the 6-month probation period ended, they received word that the final adoption papers had been approved. Jonah and Lily Hutchins were now legally Jonah and Lily Ward, with all the rights and protections that came with it. They held the celebration they'd promised, inviting every neighbor within a day's ride. The Fosters came, along with the shopkeeper, the preacher, and even some people they'd never met who'd heard the story and wanted to see the family that had fought so hard to stay together. Eliza had made a cake, 3 layers tall, covered in cream frosting. Lily's eyes went wide when she saw it. It's beautiful, Ma. Not as beautiful as you, sweetheart. They ate and danced and told stories. As the sun set, Caleb stood and called for quiet. I want to say something, he announced. A year ago, I rode into a settlement I can't even remember the name of, looking for supplies. I wasn't looking for a wife. I wasn't looking for children. I wasn't looking for any of this. But sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. He looked at Eliza. You've made me better than I ever thought I could be. You've given me a reason to build something that lasts. Then he looked at the children. And you two, you've taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love each other, even when it's hard. Jonah stepped forward. Can I say something too? Of course. The boy's voice was steady and strong. A year ago, Lily and I had nothing. We were scared and alone and didn't think anyone would ever want us, but Pa chose us. Ma chose us. They fought for us when they didn't have to. They loved us when we didn't deserve it. And they taught us that being unwanted doesn't mean you're not worth loving. It just means you haven't found the right people yet. There wasn't a dry eye in the clearing. The party continued late into the night. When everyone finally left and the children were asleep, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch, watching the stars. We did it, Eliza said softly. We actually built something real. We did. I never thought I'd have this, a home, a family, love. Neither did I. She leaned her head on his shoulder. What do you think happens next? We keep going. We raise these kids, we work the land, we grow old together. That sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been unwanted by the world but had found each other and built something beautiful from scraps and determination and love. Years passed. The homestead grew. They added rooms to the house, expanded the fields, bought more animals. Jonah grew into a strong, thoughtful young man who worked the land with his father and dreamed of one day having his own homestead. Lily became a bright, curious girl who read everything she could get her hands on and talked about maybe becoming a teacher. The pine tree they'd planted grew tall and strong, its branches reaching toward the sky, its roots deep in the earth. It stood as a testament to what they'd built, something that started small and alone but flourished because it had good soil and people who cared for it. And through all of it, Caleb and Eliza remained each other's constant. They weathered storms and celebrated victories. They raised children who knew they were loved. They built a life that honored the second chances they'd been given. One spring morning, many years after that first meeting in the church, Caleb woke to find Eliza already awake, watching him with the same look she'd had on their wedding night, uncertain but hopeful. What is it? He asked. I was just thinking about how you chose me when nobody else would, about how that one choice changed everything. Best choice I ever made. Mine too. She smiled. I love you, Caleb Ward. I love you too, Eliza Ward. They rose together and started their day as they had for years, as they would for years to come. Two people who'd been unwanted had chosen each other and built a family, a home, a life that proved love wasn't about perfection or rescue or grand romantic gestures. It was about showing up, about working hard, about choosing each other every single day, even when it was difficult. It was about building something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of love and perseverance and the simple, profound truth that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. And as the sun rose over the Montana mountains, casting golden light across the homestead they'd built together, Caleb and Eliza Ward knew they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for all along. A place to belong, a reason to stay, a love worth fighting for, and they'd found it in each other.